Slamming shut with a deafening clang, heavy iron grates echoed through the freezing night. Above, the mob held their breath, waiting for inevitable screams. A massive beast stepped from the shadows, eyes glowing with lethal hunger. Yet, the expected bloodbath never happened. What followed next made everyone fall silent. The winter of 1,348 inches, the isolated settlement of Alder's Keep was unforgiving, but the cold was the least of the villagers' concerns. Deep in the untamed stretches of the northern forests, a pack of unnaturally large wolves had claimed the territory. For generations, the village maintained a fragile, unholy pact to ensure their own survival. Once every decade, when the harsh winters drove the beasts to the edge of starvation, the village offered a sacrifice. They called it the Tithe of the Hollows. Odette was never meant to be the sacrifice. She was simply a healer, a woman who lived on the fringe of the settlement where the pines met the cobblestone. At 22, she possessed a quiet, resilient beauty and a vast knowledge of herbal remedies passed down from her grandmother. When the sweating sickness ravaged the lower quarters of Alder's Keep, it was Odette who brewed the feverfew and willow bark that saved dozens, including the wife of the town's highest authority, Magistrate Godfrey. But gratitude in Alder's Keep was a fickle currency. Godfrey was a vain, deeply corrupt man who ruled the village through fear and religious fanaticism. He had long desired Odette, making his intentions known in the shadowed corridors of the town hall. When she publicly rejected his advances, humiliating him in front of the local aldermen, her fate was sealed. Godfrey could not execute her without cause, so he orchestrated a campaign of whispers. He claimed Odette's miraculous cures were not the work of medicine, but of dark, pagan magic. He accused her of consorting with the very beasts that haunted their woods. The turning point came when a local farmer, a man named Finnick, was found torn apart on the edge of Odette's property. The villagers, blinded by grief and manipulated by Godfrey's silver tongue, dragged Odette from her cottage in the dead of night. There was no trial. There was only the freezing mud, the blinding glare of pitch pine torches, and the deafening roar of a terrified, bloodthirsty mob. They bound her wrists with thick, coarse hemp. Odette did not weep as they marched her through the village square. She walked with her head held high, the biting wind whipping her dark hair across her bruised face. She locked eyes with the people she had healed, women whose children she had delivered, men whose broken bones she had set. One by one, they looked away, their guilt swallowed by their desperate need for a scapegoat. If giving Odette to the wolves meant their own families would survive the winter, they would gladly wash their hands of her blood. The wolf den was a horrific relic of a forgotten era, an ancient, crumbling Roman amphitheater sunken into the earth just 3 miles from the village borders. The stone walls were 30 feet high, slick with ice and impossible to climb. At the bottom lay a massive pit littered with the bleached bones of past sacrifices. Overhanging the pit was a heavy iron grate, operated by a rusted winch system. Magistrate Godfrey stood at the edge of the precipice, flanked by his guards. His breath plumed in the freezing air as he looked down at Odette, a cruel, triumphant sneer twisting his features. "You have chosen the company of beasts over the grace of civilized men, Odette," Godfrey proclaimed, his voice echoing off the ancient stones, loud enough for the hundreds of onlookers gathering at the rim to hear. "Tonight, you shall pay the tithe. May your blood buy our safety." Odette looked up at him, her chest heaving, but her voice was eerily calm. "My blood will buy you nothing, Godfrey. The forest remembers. The forest knows." Godfrey's jaw tightened. He raised his hand and dropped it. The guards shoved her forward. Odette tumbled over the edge, sliding down the steep, icy chute that fed directly into the heart of the ruins. She hit the frozen earth at the bottom with a sickening thud, the breath knocked from her lungs. Above her, the heavy iron portcullis slammed down, sealing the only exit. She was trapped. And she was not alone. The air in the pit was thick with the stench of copper and damp earth. Odette pushed herself up onto her knees, wincing as a sharp pain flared in her shoulder. The moonlight barely pierced the gloom, casting long skeletal shadows across the scattered bones. High above, the rim of the amphitheater was lined with torches. Hundreds of villagers peered over the edge, their faces illuminated by the flickering firelight. They were completely silent now, leaning in to witness the brutal execution. From the deepest, darkest alcove of the ruins, a low, guttural growl vibrated through the ground. It was a sound that defied nature, too deep, too resonant to belong to a normal wolf. Odette froze. She slowly pushed herself to her feet, her back pressing against the freezing stone wall. She had heard the legends of the beasts, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality. The creature that stepped into the moonlight was monstrous. It stood nearly 7 feet tall at the shoulder, its fur a stark, midnight black, tipped with silver that caught the moonlight. Its muscles coiled beneath its pelt with terrifying power, and its claws gouged deep grooves into the frozen earth with every step. But it was the eyes that stopped Odette's heart. They were not the mindless, frantic eyes of a hungry animal. They were a piercing, intelligent amber. The villagers above began to murmur in hushed, terrified excitement. This was the Alpha, the beast of the hollows itself. The giant wolf lowered its massive head, its lips curling back to reveal teeth the size of daggers. It took a slow, deliberate step toward her, then another. Odette closed her eyes. She refused to give Godfrey the satisfaction of hearing her scream. She thought of her quiet garden, the smell of crushed lavender, the warmth of the hearth. She braced herself for the agonizing tearing of flesh. The beast closed the distance in a single, terrifying bound. The hot, metallic scent of its breath washed over her face. But the bite never came. Instead, a massive, wet nose pressed against her bound hands. The wolf inhaled deeply, a long, shuddering sniff that seemed to draw in the very essence of her. Odette opened her eyes in shock. The great beast was towering over her, its massive face mere inches from hers. The amber eyes were wide, scanning her face, taking in the bruised cheekbone, the torn dress, the freezing, trembling frame. The wolf let out a sharp, confused huff, and then, to the absolute horror of the onlookers above, it lowered its massive head and gently nudged her shoulder. A collective gasp echoed from the rim of the pit. Odette's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked into those amber eyes, and a sudden, impossible jolt of recognition struck her. 3 months prior, during the first snowmelt, Odette had been foraging near the Black Ravine. She had found a man, half dead, bleeding out from a massive, jagged wound in his side. He was a stranger, with dark hair and striking, amber-colored eyes. He had refused to tell her his name, but Odette had dragged him to her hidden root cellar. For 4 days and 4 nights, she had nursed him, stitching his wounds, feeding him broth, and applying a highly distinct, pungent poultice of crushed yarrow and wolfsbane to fight the infection. On the 5th morning, the man had vanished, leaving only a carved wooden wolf on her table as thanks. She stared at the monster before her. The scent of her own distinct yarrow poultice still faintly lingered in her clothes, mixed with the sweat of her terror. "You," Odette whispered, her voice barely carrying over the wind. The wolf let out a low, rumbling whine that sounded entirely too human. It stepped back, its gaze snapping upward toward the rim of the amphitheater. The amber eyes narrowed into slits of pure, unadulterated fury. Up on the walls, the crowd was in pandemonium. "Why isn't it killing her?" a woman shrieked. "Shoot the beast! Shoot them both!" Magistrate Godfrey roared, his face purple with rage. He turned to his archers, violently shoving one forward. "Knock your arrows, you fools! Do it now!" The archers fumbled with their longbows, drawing the strings back. Down in the pit, the Alpha reacted with lightning speed. The massive wolf stepped protectively in front of Odette, shielding her entirely with its colossal body. It threw its head back and let out a roar, not a howl, but a deafening, earth-shaking roar that caused the stone walls to vibrate. Then, the beast began to change. Bones cracked and snapped in a sickening, rhythmic symphony. Fur receded into skin. The monstrous form contorted, shifting upward as the villagers above screamed in sheer terror, dropping their torches into the darkness. When the agonizing transformation was complete, a man stood before Odette. He was tall, powerfully built, and completely unbothered by the freezing temperature. Broad shoulders, dark hair, and the familiar, dangerous amber eyes. It was Donovan, the stranger she had saved. He didn't look at Odette. His lethal gaze remained fixed on the men above. He reached down to the earth, his muscles flexing as he picked up a massive, rusted broadsword left behind by a doomed gladiator centuries ago. Donovan pointed the blade directly up at Magistrate Godfrey. "The tithe is rejected," Donovan's voice boomed, deep and raspy, carrying a supernatural resonance that made the villagers' blood run cold. "But I will be taking payment for this insult. Anyone who touches this woman will drown in their own blood." The silence that fell over the amphitheater was absolute. Not a single bowstring was released. Even Godfrey stood frozen, his eyes wide with a paralyzing mortal dread. They had thrown the girl into the den to appease a monster, but instead of sacrificing her, they had just given the Alpha of the Northern Territories his queen and a reason to tear Alder's Keep to the ground. Donovan lowered the rusted broadsword. The sheer weight of the weapon would have strained a seasoned knight, but in his grasp it appeared as light as a willow switch. He turned slowly toward Odette, the ferocious intensity in his amber eyes softening instantly into a profound, almost reverent gentleness. The bitter, freezing wind continued to howl through the cavernous depths of the ancient Roman amphitheater, whipping her torn garments. Yet she felt a sudden wave of radiant, furnace-like heat emanating from his skin. He closed the distance between them with silent, predatory grace, kneeling in the frozen mud. With effortless precision, he snapped the thick, coarse hemp ropes binding her wrists, his calloused thumbs briefly brushing against her bruised, freezing skin. A jolt of electric warmth traveled up her arm, chasing away the bone-deep chill of the pit. "You saved my life in the shadow of the Black Ravine," Donovan murmured, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that resonated within her very chest. "I told you then that the debt would be repaid. I did not anticipate that the ignorant cowards of this wretched village would offer you up as a sacrificial lamb to my own kind." Odette massaged her raw wrists, staring at the rugged, handsome face of the man who had just shifted from a monstrous wolf. "You are the Alpha," she whispered, the reality of the situation finally piercing through her shock, "the beast of the hollows, the creature they have feared for generations. And yet, you are a man." "I am both," Donovan replied, his gaze flickering briefly to the sky. "And right now, I am your shield." High above them, chaos had erupted. The absolute paralysis that had gripped the villagers shattered, replaced by sheer, unadulterated panic. The realization that the Alpha of the dreaded Northern Pack was not just a mindless, bloodthirsty animal, but a sentient, shape-shifting warrior capable of wielding human weapons, broke their minds. Magistrate Godfrey was screaming until his vocal cords tore, desperately shoving his own guards toward the treacherous, icy edge of the ruins. "Kill him! Drop the oil! Burn the entire pit to ashes!" Godfrey bellowed, his face a mask of purple, vein-popping terror. He grabbed his trusted captain, a ruthless mercenary named Cedric, by the collar of his chainmail. "If that demon escapes this trench, we are all dead. Do you hear me? Light the pitch." Cedric drew his steel longsword, his hands trembling violently. He motioned for the archers to grab the barrels of flammable pitch they kept for emergencies. But before a single flint could be struck, a new sound paralyzed the night. It started as a low, mournful resonance from the eastern ridge, a single, haunting howl that pierced the thick canopy of the winter forest. It was immediately answered by another from the west, then a dozen more from the north, until the entire perimeter of the ancient amphitheater was surrounded by an echoing, symphonic chorus of pure, primal fury. The ground beneath the villagers' boots began to tremble. From the impenetrable shadows of the tree line, massive shapes began to emerge. These were not the common, scrawny timber wolves the hunters occasionally trapped. These were dire beasts, gargantuan predators standing 5 to 6 feet at the shoulder, their pelts ranging from ash gray to russet brown. Leading the charge was a massive, scarred female wolf, her silver coat gleaming in the moonlight. This was Maeve, Donovan's fiercely loyal beta. Beside her bounded Garrett, a dark-furred behemoth whose jaws could snap a horse's femur in half. The villagers screamed, abandoning their torches, their weapons, and any semblance of order. It was an absolute rout. The pack did not slaughter indiscriminately, however. They moved with terrifying, coordinated, military precision. They leaped over the frantic, fleeing commoners, targeting only the armed guards and Godfrey's loyal soldiers. Maeve clamped her massive jaws around the winch mechanism that controlled the heavy iron grate, snapping the thick oak lever with a sickening crunch. The heavy portcullis violently ground upward, the counterweight slamming into the stone walls with the force of a thunderclap, leaving the tunnel entrance wide open. "Come," Donovan said, standing and offering Odette his large, incredibly warm hand. "We are leaving this cursed pit." Odette hesitated for only a fraction of a second before placing her hand in his. He pulled her flush against his solid chest, his arm wrapping protectively around her waist. With terrifying speed and agility, Donovan navigated the steep, icy incline of the exit chute, carrying her as if she weighed no more than a bundle of dry lavender. When they emerged into the clearing at the top of the ruins, the scene was one of utter subjugation. Dozens of massive wolves had corralled the remaining guards into a tight circle, their growls a continuous, deafening rumble. Magistrate Godfrey was on his knees in the freezing snow, weeping openly, his lavish velvet cloak stained with mud and urine. Captain Cedric stood beside him, his sword dropped in the snow, his hands raised in absolute surrender. Donovan set Odette down gently behind him, stepping forward into the moonlight. As he moved, the great wolves immediately bowed their massive heads, submitting completely to their alpha. "Alder's Keep," Donovan's voice boomed across the silent, terrified crowd of villagers who had been herded back into the clearing by the pack. "For generations we have honored the ancient pact. We stayed to the deep woods. We took only the sick and the weak of the deer herds. We never hunted your children. We never hunted your women. The tithe was a fabrication, a lie invented by your own corrupt leaders to dispose of those who threatened their absolute power." A collective gasp rippled through the freezing crowd. Harrison, the town's burly blacksmith, stepped forward, his face pale. But the farmer, Finnick, he was torn apart by wolves. "We saw the claw marks. We saw the tracks leading to Odette's cottage." Donovan let out a dark, humorless laugh. He walked slowly toward the trembling Magistrate Godfrey and Captain Cedric. He leaned in, his nose flaring as he inhaled deeply. "My kind leaves a distinct scent, blacksmith," Donovan growled, his amber eyes locking onto Cedric. "But when I smell this, Captain, I do not smell the forest. I smell the sweat of a coward. I smell pig's blood used to paint false trails. And I smell the distinct, unmistakable copper tang of Finnick's blood soaked into the leather of Cedric's boots." Donovan suddenly lunged, his hand snapping out to grab Cedric by the throat. With a terrifying display of supernatural strength, he lifted the armored captain entirely off the ground with one hand. "Tell them," Donovan snarled, his voice vibrating with predatory menace. "Tell them who killed the farmer, or I will let Garrett tear the truth from your throat." Cedric gagged, his face turning a mottled blue. It was the magistrate," he choked out, tears streaming down his face. "Godfrey ordered it." Finnick had discovered Godfrey was embezzling the winter grain stores. "Godfrey paid me to stab Finnick with a hunting knife. Then we used iron rakes to mimic claw marks. We dragged his body to the healer's property to frame her because she refused Godfrey's bed. Please, God have mercy on me." Donovan tossed the captain into the snow like a discarded rag doll. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. The villagers turned their gazes toward Magistrate Godfrey. The fear in their eyes was gone, replaced instantly by a burning, vengeful fury. They had dragged an innocent woman from her home. They had almost sacrificed their only healer to the cold abyss, all based on the lies of a greedy, rejected tyrant. Evelyn, A mother whose child Odette had saved from the sweating sickness only weeks prior picked up a heavy stone from the frozen mud. She did not say a word, but the look of pure hatred on her face spoke volumes. Soon, Harrison the blacksmith picked up a discarded sword. The mob was no longer aiming their wrath at the beasts. They were aiming it squarely at the monster in human skin. Donovan turned his back on the pathetic, groveling magistrate. He knew the angry villagers would enact brutal justice. The massive wolves parted seamlessly as the alpha walked. Odette stood trembling in the freezing, unforgiving winter wind. Rushing adrenaline was finally fading from her weary system. She felt exhausted, her tired muscles aching deeply tonight. Her bruised face throbbed with every beat of heart. The cold snow beneath their boots crunched softly in night. He stopped before her, shielding her from biting gales. The very loud sounds of chaos quickly faded entirely away. She looked up into his striking amber eyes with wonder. The formidable beast who had terrorized these lands stood calmly. The debt is fully repaid, Odette whispered into the darkness. You have saved my fragile life from certain, agonizing death. You have officially cleared my tarnished name in this village. You may go back to your dark woods now, Alpha. Donovan reached out with his large, incredibly warm right hand. His calloused knuckles gently brushed against her freezing, bruised cheek. The touch was startlingly tender and shockingly full of pure emotion. Odette felt her breath hitch in her cold throat. The debt is indeed paid, Odette, Donovan said very softly. But my heavy heart is certainly not free from you. When I lay dying inside your hidden, damp root cellar, my body burned with a terrible fever that consumed me. It was your sweet voice that kept me safely tethered. It was your skilled hands that stitched my torn flesh. I left you that small wooden carving as a promise, a solemn promise that I would return when winter broke. Odette stared at him, her racing heart hammering extremely fast. She completely ignored the violent mob gathering right behind them. You always intended to return for me? She asked quietly. I am the mighty Alpha of these vast northern territories, Donovan stated, stepping much closer to her shivering, frail form. I command the wild beasts of the deep, shadowed valleys. I control the hunters of the tall, frozen mountain peaks. But a powerful king is absolutely nothing without his queen. I saw exactly how these cruel people mercilessly treated you. I watched them ruthlessly drag you through the freezing winter mud. They simply do not deserve your miraculous healing gifts today. They never deserved your boundless, profound human compassion, anyway. Maeve, the massive silver wolf, trotted forward gracefully without hesitation. She affectionately nudged Odette's hip with her large, wet nose. The giant animal let out a soft, wonderfully welcoming whine. Garrett and the rest of the mighty pack echoed her. Their low, deep rumbles vibrated strongly through the frozen earth. It was a beautiful chorus of absolute submission and acceptance. Come with me, Donovan urged, offering his warm hand once again. Leave this wretched settlement of rigid stone and endless lies. In my huge territory, you will never be needlessly feared for your extensive knowledge. You will be highly revered. You will safely run beneath the silver moonlight, completely untouchable. Odette looked silently past Donovan's broad, extremely muscular right shoulder. She saw the remaining villagers, her former untrustworthy, fearful neighbors. They were looking at her with a heavy mixture of guilt. A profound sense of awe and lingering terror filled them. They had selfishly betrayed her trust in their darkest hour. When the angry mob came to her door, nobody had stood. Not one single person had bravely defended her innocent life. They had willingly marched her to the dreadful, terrifying wolf den. There was absolutely nothing left here now. She looked deeply back at Donovan without any remaining hesitation. He was the feared monster who was also a man. She saw no dark deception within his stunning amber eyes. She saw only a fierce, intensely burning loyalty that shined. It eclipsed anything she had ever known in this world. Odette reached out and firmly placed her small, cold hand. She put it directly into his large, incredibly warm grip. Take me to the quiet woods, she commanded very softly. A slow, truly breathtaking smile spread across Donovan's rugged face. He gently swept her completely off her extremely tired feet. He cradled her very securely against his broad, solid chest. He turned toward the dark, imposing tree line of the forest. With a powerfully resonant, deafening roar that violently shook branches, Donovan proudly signaled his incredibly loyal pack of deadly wolves. The great beast turned and vanished into the pitch darkness. They moved quickly, like silent, beautiful silver phantoms gliding gracefully. They ran quickly over the icy, completely frozen northern earth. Donovan followed them closely, carrying Odette safely away from cruelty. Alder's Keep was officially left behind them for all eternity. A brand new, wonderful chapter was finally starting completely anew. In the quiet months that followed, the local legend transformed. Alder's Keep tragically fell into absolute ruin and total despair. The corrupt village infrastructure collapsed under the massive, heavy weight. Godfrey's dark crimes were loudly exposed by a violent rebellion. The broken village was entirely abandoned by the frightened people. It was slowly reclaimed by the creeping, wild, green vines. Unforgiving winter frosts destroyed the remaining empty cobblestone village homes. But deep inside the dense northern woods, another legend grew. Travelers who accidentally wandered too close spoke in hushed whispers. They spoke nervously of a magnificent, truly massive black beast. The giant wolf powerfully patrolled the dangerous, heavily forested borders. More astonishingly, travelers eagerly spoke of the truly beautiful woman. She proudly rode upon his broad back during snowy nights. The stunning queen with dark hair wore warm, luxurious furs. She gracefully possessed miraculous, unmatched healing powers for the innocent. If you were truly pure, the kind queen safely appeared. She offered a soothing, potent poultice of fresh, crushed yarrow. But if you carried dark cruelty, you faced the alpha. You vanished entirely into the dark depths of the forest. Odette happily ruled her vast, majestic kingdom alongside her beast. Did you expect that incredible twist? The story of Odette and Donovan proves that sometimes the real monsters are the men hiding in plain sight, while the beasts in the woods hold the truest honor. If you were captivated by this thrilling tale of medieval romance, betrayal, and justice, do not forget to hit that like button. Share this video with your fellow story lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more epic, real-life, inspired, dramatic storytelling. See you soon.